This is a 9-foot 6-inch Stewart Colin McPhillips Pro Nose Rider longboard. It's a fantastic board that I picked up in Narragansett, Rhode Island during my college years, and it's an awesome longboard that I've done a really bad job at taking care of. So what I want to do is kind of run through the whole board, clean it up, find out all the different things we have wrong with it: delamination, dings, fiberglass cracks, water in the foam, all that kind of stuff. And we're gonna go through how to fix them, how to do them, so that people at home, it's pretty easy to find cheap, beat up surfboards on Craigslist and stuff. And it's not that hard to really bring them back to life. And it produces a lot less waste than going and buying a brand new board.
A little bit difficult to tell where the damage is. Like you can see there's a good old ding and repair job there, but in general it's a little hard to see because it's so dirty. So I'm just going to take the fin out and just get a cloth and a scrub brush and just give this a good bath so we can reveal how much work we have to do.
I don't see why it was so hard to get out. It's only been in there for almost 20 years.
Once you wash off the board, you get a much better sense for how much damage there actually is. Some sections look better than others, and some sections look worse. Starting at the nose, this board has a lot of cracks and scrapes up in the fiberglass. There's actually one here that still looks like it's all the way through the glass. If I push through there, you can kind of get a sense the glass is moving a little bit. So this section needs a lot of love. This white stuff is that instant epoxy putty you can get at a surf shop, and if you're in a pinch and you just want to try to keep water from getting into the foam, you can use that, and you can tell I've used that a bunch over the years. But this really is a temporary repair, and as you can see, there's a good crack right here. It's not a permanent repair, so there's a lot of work on the underside of the board towards the nose. As we sand this down, I'm guessing we'll probably end up putting a nice big piece of glass here just to really strengthen it up and fix it. Moving back, the rails aren't too bad. Got a few just sort of dings here that look like they were partially repaired, but could definitely use some love, going back and kind of grinding those out, putting more glass on them. Then there's a bunch of these little kind of punctures in the glass. They feel relatively stiff. This one's fairly big, but still pretty stiff. There was a repair done here. Same with this, the repair there as well. So what we're going to want to do with this kind of stuff is just sand it off and probably put a nice patch of glass and then fair it and make it nice and smooth. It'll look really ugly, but we're going to paint this board anyway. So any work we do on it is going to get erased with the good paint job. Here are the specs on the board. The shaper, whoever GM is, 9.6, 23 3/8, 3 3/8. It's a great board. I love this shape. This might be a little bit hard to see on the video, but here we have a kind of like a dent, and if I pull the board up, you can kind of see it there. See that dent? You don't really want a dent in your board. It's not going to make it as hydrodynamically smooth. So this is something, it's not actually a crack, and the fiberglass feels pretty stiff. So we probably don't need to glass it, but we might want to put some fairing compound in here and just smoothen it out. Looking along the stringers are areas where you can get some cracks because you have really stiff wood and then you have more flexible foam underneath it. So over time what will happen is there'll be a kind of like a ledge. You can see the ledge here where the foam will get compressed but the wood will stay up. So this tends to be an area of fracture, and you can kind of see we got some cracks here. So we're going to want to go in very carefully and make sure all these fin boxes, everything along the stringer is looking good. And but so far on the underside, nothing really too complicated. The top side of the board actually looks pretty good. There's no real major dings. We've got a couple just little dings and cracks that have been repaired that we can freshen up and just kind of clean up. Up on the nose, there's probably the most damage up here, just some cracks. But when we attack the bottom and do that glass job, we can try to tackle that all together. But moving aft on the board, there's not too much damage until we get to the back. And there's something right around here you might not be able to notice. If we come back here, there's a balloon here. And if we push down on this, you'll see the whole, let's see if I can get this. You'll see how all that glass moving up and down. And here what's happened is the fiberglass has actually lifted off the foam. This is called delamination. And delamination is kind of like a growing problem. If you don't deal with it, it can grow and grow and grow, and the fiberglass will separate more and more. And the big problem with this is the fiberglass bonded to the foam is what gives the board its strength. So having this here, especially having one so big, you know, it's about a foot long, is really making the board weaker. So 2 ways you can fix this. Kind of the quick and dirty way that some people do is you can drill a tiny hole in one side, a tiny hole in the other, and you can kind of squeegee in resin, and it'll fill in the gap between the glass and the foam. The problem with that is you're going to be left with kind of like a big bump, and it's really not the ideal solution for the maximizing strength. What we're going to do is we're just going to go and we're actually going to cut this piece of old fiberglass out, expose the foam, and we're going to re-glass this completely. Since we're going to go to the trouble of really trying to bring this board back to life, we might as well tackle this properly. So we've got a little delamination, we've got a little bit of some dings, some cracks, kind of a little bit of everything, but nothing too bad. The structure of the board, the stiffness of the board is good. It doesn't seem like it's going to buckle or anything, which would be that'd be a much harder thing to fix. And the rails, the overall shape and rocker of the board look great. So overall, I think this is going to be a manageable repair, and hopefully this will be stuff that you can apply to boards that you find at garage sales and stuff to help bring it back to life and have fun with them.
The first thing we're going to do in this process is just go through the board with our orbital sander, and we're just going to kind of take down any excess material, like on these repairs, these sloppy repairs I did years ago, and we're going to kind of work through the gloss coat on this, probably take off most of the gloss coat, because we're going to end up re-glassing this board anyway. Just little things like this, these like kind of sloppy patches, and we're just going to give the board a good sanding. I want to make sure that I don't go, you can kind of see here some of the fiberglass weave starting to come up. I don't want to take off so much resin that I start getting into the weave, but just enough that I'm kind of getting to the weave, if that makes sense. So just stuff like this is really flattening it out and exposing where my damage is, and that's going to give us a great starting point to start doing our individual repair jobs for different cracks. So time to power this bad boy up, go to town. We've gotten to the point where we've reached the bubble, the infamous bubble back here on the back of the board. This is the delamination bubble, and to get this off, I've been thinking about it a little bit. I've never done this before, so I don't really know the best way. I'm going to use a razor blade, and I'm going to try to cut very carefully around the perimeter of the glass and carefully peel it off. The fiberglass is too thick for me to get in there with just a razor blade, so I'm switching over to the Leatherman knife. That's giving me a little bit more oomph, and hopefully that'll work. So this is really interesting. I've only cut a little square out just to start, because I wanted to see how the Leatherman worked, but you can see just from this square, you can look at, here's our foam, and we've got almost a ½ inch gap between the foam and this outer layer of glass. Now I don't really like, it's kind of annoying to just cut with the knife. It's not super efficient, and it's making a little bit of a mess, and you don't want fiberglass everywhere. So what I think I'm gonna do is lift up. You know, it ain't pretty, right? But it should, see how it's starting to go? It should start to go, look at that, boom, easy, quick, right? I can pull a lot of glass off. I just gotta be careful as I get towards the boundary where the glass is still adhered to the foam. I need to be much more careful so I'm not ripping off good glass. But just gonna keep working on this, make sure you vacuum up your particles, because fiberglass is hazardous, and making progress. Okay, a few minutes later, this is our delamination patch. So what I'm gonna do, and this, you know, may not be the correct way, but this is the way I would do it, is the first thing I want to do is try to get everything to be relatively level, right? So we have a pretty big crater here. We have some foam that is broken down. We have some compression. We've removed a fair amount of fiberglass. So we have like a fairly big kind of hole in the board. And so what I want to do first is get some resin and fill it with some filler to make it kind of like pasty and thick. And I want to use that to fill in the hole to make it so everything's sort of on the same plane. And the idea with that is after we're going to sand it flush, so this is relatively flat, and then we're going to put a big fiberglass patch on it and then make that flush. And it's important for when you put fiberglass down on something, you want to make sure you're putting it down on something flat. You don't want it to have like a bunch of ridges and stuff, because that's going to create areas of weakness. So step one for us is to level this out. All right, we've got our Total Boat epoxy here, and I've just mixed in, this is about 5 pumps of epoxy, and I've mixed in some of the high density filler, and I'll put a link to that in the video what that is. It's just basically like white powder, and I want to get it to like consistency that it's just sort of flowing, but just barely. I want it to be as thick as possible, but I still want it to flow, and the reason for that is it's going to be a lot easier if I can just pour this in. And I've already mixed this for quite a while, so we're good on time. And what I'm going to do with my ultra fancy squeegee here is just pull it back and forth. And it's better to do this in steps. Like if you don't know if you have enough, it's better to just go slow. You can always add more. It's a lot more difficult to take it away. And remember, pretty much everything you add here, if you add too much, you're going to be sanding it away. So you want to be as precise as you can. I don't think I've added quite enough, but that's okay. And this is looking pretty good. And remember, this is going to look hideous, but we're going to paint it, so you're not going to see it. And make sure you get resin all up into this edge. This is really important. The edges are super important. Okay, so I'm out of resin, and I've also put some blocks here to make the board level, because you don't want it to be crooked, or all the resin will slide to one side and it'll look terrible. But what I want to do is look down on this side here, and I'm just trying to make sure I'm filling this up. So I still probably got about halfway there. I need to go mix up another batch, and I'm just going to kind of build this up. We let our resin dry overnight and then came in and started sanding it, and it's hard as a rock. We want to do the same thing that we did here, but we want to do it for all the smaller issues. So I went through the board. Let's go flip it here. And I did this, I didn't film it because it was kind of boring, but I've just gone through and found all these little parts that had a little bit of fiberglass that was just soft with foam crushing underneath, and just cut them out, right? So I'm just cutting out the cancer, and making sure everywhere around here is still stiff. As we move forward, you'll see they get bigger. Some on the rail, and then up to the front. This is where we have most of our problems. And what we're gonna do, quite a big one up here on the rail, and then some up on the nose. So what we're gonna do all in one swoop is mix up a decent batch of epoxy, and we're just gonna come in and shoo. So on this batch, we made it a little bit thicker than the last one. So it's not quite running. It's kind of like, I don't know, a little thicker than chunky peanut butter. See, it doesn't even run off our little knife there. It just kind of holds in place. And I did that because we got some curvature here, and I want this stuff to just kind of stay where I put it. I don't want it to run anywhere. That'll make my life easier. And having a squeegee would make this easier, but I don't have one. And I'm just gonna shoot that in there. Boom. And I realize this is not elegant repair work, and people that are like board shapers that do this for a living are going to cringe at the quality of my work. But this is meant to be for everyday folks like you and me. There she is, all patched up with some resin curing. Really ugly, but sealed up, which is all that matters. Fiona is wetting the glass out that's going to go on this big patch. We're going to do the big one first as sort of a practice run. And we still had some bumps in here. that might prove to be problematic. So we're going to do this all in once, which is a little challenging, but I've got a little bit of resin here with filler. I'm going to take my squeegee and I'm just going to kind of come through and fill any of these remaining holes. I need both hands to do that, so I'm going to turn the camera off in a second. But once that's done, we're going to carefully put the fiberglass over this. So we're doing, again, 2-in-1, kind of filling the holes and putting the glass patch. And then we're going to use some painter's plastic to clean it up, and I'll show that in a second. The repair is complete. We've got the painter's plastic over the top, squeegeed all the bubbles out, pressing the plastic really tight into the fiberglass. We have 2 layers of fiberglass over here. And what's really nice about this technique is when we're done, when this is cured, we'll just peel the plastic off, and we're going to have a very, very smooth finish right off the bat. And we'll probably only have to do one more round of fairing just to make sure the edge of where the fiberglass starts to lift off from the other part of the board, kind of around the perimeter. We'll do a little bit of fairing in there, and probably one more round of painter's plastic. But then we're pretty much going to be ready for paint. So it's a really fast way. Instead of just, if you lay the glass without the plastic, you're going to be left with a very like textured finish, and that's going to be difficult to paint over. You're going to usually have to put some fairing compound in that. So this just kind of accelerates the whole procedure, and I find that you can get a really, really good result. So it's a really cool approach. How's it going out here?
Working by candlelight.
It was raining earlier, so we couldn't work out here, and so now, and it's cooler at night anyway. Fiona is patching up all of the many little dings on the bottom of the Stuart, and then it should be cured and ready to sand tomorrow. And this is what it looks like after we've done our patchwork using that plastic technique. We have a bunch of repairs throughout the board with little patches of fiberglass on them. And one thing we wanted to look at is experiment with how a repair looked with or without the plastic. So, because obviously plastic is like waste, it's gonna go in the trash, so is it really all that worth it? And so this is a repair that doesn't have the plastic, and you can't really tell, but there's a really defined ridge on the perimeter of the fiberglass, and this is gonna make it challenging to blend this in. Whereas if you go, say, to the front of the board, we put glass on this entire section. There's a piece of glass going all the way back to about here, and you almost can't even see it, and you can almost not even feel it because of the plastic. So that's really the great thing about the plastic technique, is that it helps really set that transition up for success early on, whereas we're gonna have to work a little bit harder to do the rest of these. So the plan of attack for this is we're not even gonna really sand it. Like, you can get yourself really lost in sanding and applying. We're gonna try not to do that. We'll give it a very brief sand just to roughen up the surface, just to make sure everything sticks, but it's gonna be a really like quick one. And then we're going to get our epoxy that we use in almost all of our steps, and we're gonna mix it with a thing called micro balloons. And micro balloons are a type of filler similar to like the filler we used in the previous steps, but they're a specific type of filler that sands really, really fine and really well, and it almost behaves like a fairing compound. And we're going to paint the micro balloons all around the repair, and we're going to put just a thin layer, not like a lot, a thin layer all the way over the repair. And then when that cures, we're going to come through with the sandpaper and really fair it clean, and that'll hopefully be our last step before paint. The trick with all this is to try to minimize sanding, putting on. People that work with boats and boards and stuff, you can waste a lot of time and a lot of materials putting resin on and then sanding it all off and then putting it back on and sanding it all off. So sometimes less is more, and that's sort of what we're going for with this. All right, we're just prepping our board here for the last little bit of fairing filler. And one little tip with cleaning a board before you do work on it, getting all the sanding residue off, is to stroke with denatured alcohol in one direction. And I forget where I learned it, but someone was telling me if you go back and forth, you're just basically smearing all the
all the powder and all the stuff you sanded off all over the board. So micro balloons, they also call them microspheres. It's a type of filler that you can put in epoxy, just like we used the high density filler before. This is a very, very fine powder. I think they actually are, they may be like microscopic spheres. And when you put it in, it creates a consistency that's almost like probably Elmer's glue. And so it's very runny. And so you need a paintbrush to apply it. And how we're going to apply it is we're going to paint it on over our repairs. Just going to put like a nice film, a nice thick film over our repairs, specifically focusing on the edge, right? The edge is, we want to fill in that edge with a little bit of this stuff. And this is really a thin film, so if you have lots of big bumps in your glass job, it's not going to really work. You're going to have to sand those out first. This is sort of like a final step to fill in the smallest of things. But it sands really well, and it wets out really nice, and it'll leave this fiberglass repair feeling smooth. You won't even know it's there.
We finally got to the final step before paint for the Stewart longboard, and it's a pretty rewarding part of the job. We're going to be polishing off our micro balloons. So if you go up here just to see what we were trying to accomplish, you can kind of see our fiberglass patches in here, but if I run my hand over this, I really can't feel that seam. And that's what the goal is. When we polish this down, you're not going to be able to feel or really even notice the change in shape caused by the patches, because you don't want your board all lumpy. And when we paint over this and you look down the board, you're really not going to notice all the repairs we did. So that's what we're going for. Probably hit this with about not too gritty, maybe like 120, maybe even higher than that, and shouldn't take long. And we're just going to give the board a nice good polish, and when we're done, hopefully if we've done our job right, the board will be ready for paint, and then we're done. After about an hour of sanding, starting with 120 and getting all the way up to 320, the board is ready for paint. The sanding came out really good. You can't tell, but this is super smooth. Can't feel any transitions to the glass. You don't even, if you close your eyes, you wouldn't even know it was there. And when we paint the board, all these repairs will completely disappear. Let's see if I can flip to the rails as well. And there's our back side of our big repair back there. So super exciting step, a very satisfying step. And now it's time to paint the board. What we're going to try to do is paint the boat with leftover boat paint that we had from our canoe trip 2 years ago. 2 years ago? 2 years ago. So for those that don't remember, we built some canoes with CLC boats, took them down the intercoastal, and we have some old rusty total boat paint, and we figure if boat paint is good enough for a boat, why it should probably be good enough for a board, and it should be able to really cover all this up. And we're gonna just go for it. We're gonna paint the boat. We decided seafoam green is gonna be the color, and let's give it a go. What do you think? You nervous? Is it gonna work?
No, just do it.
Is it gonna work? Am I gonna be out here all night like
Do this part first. I'm curious how the front's gonna, if it's gonna like cover up front here. See if we get the coverage we need.
You ready?
Oh, it's gonna cover. Yeah, we're gonna have the coverage we need.
It's totally gonna work. So we put our first coat of paint on the board last night. It was a little dark, maybe a little difficult to see, but here we are in the glory of the sunlight. Seafoam green. Looks so good. We're so excited. It looks epic. The board, can't wait to put the top coat on. We're gonna do that now. And it's a life lesson. It's always good to keep your paint. I mean, that can of paint we had was over 2 years old, and honestly I never really thought I was going to use it, but here it comes into good use. So super stoked that I kept that stuff, and Time to paint the top side, let it dry, and then this board is done.